Dr. Peter Singer, a moral philosopher and author who has spent decades writing and speaking about the ethics of animal suffering, global poverty, and end of life choice. He's the co author of The Point of View of the Universe. And in this conversation, we discuss why people love dogs but still eat pigs, and what the evidence suggests about fish and pain, and how to think more clearly about giving, luxury, and living a meaningful life. You can read more about Dr. Singer on our website, 6degrees.blog, and our Instagram page, 6 Degrees Away. Thank you and enjoy the interview.
Most people would run into a burning building to save their dog, but they still eat bacon. Why is it so hard for us to see pigs as equal to our pets, even when we know they're just as smart?
Well, I think the reason is that we don't have pigs as pets. We do have dogs as pets. So we get to know dogs as individuals. We can see that each one is different. They have a personality. We want them to enjoy their lives with us. Um, and with pigs, we don't have any of that relationship. We never really, most people never see a pig alive because they're inside buildings anyway. They're mostly factory farmed.
Mhm.
And then they just buy pieces of ham, pork, or bacon in the supermarket. So I think it's a failure of kind of imagination to think, oh, this is the flesh of a living animal who, as you just said, are just as smart as a dog, just as able to live a good life or not. And I'm complicit in making these pigs live bad lives, which is nearly the case for nearly all of them.
Mhm. And how do you view people who are sort of take grades of I eat cow and pig, but or I don't eat cows and pigs, but I'm a pescatarian. What do you think about stuff like that?
Um, It depends what they're concerned about. If they're concerned about climate change, it makes sense not to eat cows in particular because cows emit a lot of methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas, and fish are less harmful to climate change. But if they're concerned about the suffering of animals, I think it's actually worse to eat the fish because, of course, fish are small. You eat many of them to eat as much meat as you would to eat one cow. And each one of them is an individual too. Maybe it's hard to know whether they're as capable of feeling pain and suffering as cows, but I don't see any reason to assume that they're not. And we also know that fish are farmed too. A lot of the fish that people buy are intensively farmed. It's in water, of course, but they're extremely crowded. Um, they're pretty bad lives, I think, for them. And there's no humane slaughter for fish either, so they're suffering when they die slowly. So yeah, I think that's a mistake. It's kind of again, it's sort of understandable. You can relate more to a mammal than you can to a fish. But I think if you really go into the evidence of what fish are experiencing, it's not justified to say um, I eat fish but not cows, so therefore I'm doing something good.
Mhm. And as we look for sustainable proteins, many people are turning to cricket flour and insect farming. Do we need to worry about the ethics of killing billions of insects, or do they not matter in your view?
Well, I think they matter. The thing about insects is there's a level of uncertainty. As I just said, I'm confident that fish can feel pain, and there's good research showing that that's the case. There isn't really that kind of research about insects. So there's uncertainty whether they feel pain. On the other hand, the numbers are vast. So if they can feel pain, there might be a lot of suffering.
Mhm.
Although, we don't know whether the conditions in which they're produced are ones that would cause them suffering if they are capable of suffering. So there is that uncertainty, and I think a lot of people might feel, well, I don't really know they can suffer. I hope they can't. And this is a good way of producing proteins, so it's fine. Um, I would rather avoid them, and I don't think we have any need for insect protein. We can produce plant protein more effectively. We have plenty of it. There's lots of good evidence that you absorb plant protein and can build muscle or whatever else you need to do with protein from plant protein. So I think that's the safer option and the best option really.
So as you said, there's lots of evidence regarding fish being able to feel pain. So how do you think misinformation like fish can't feel pain and things like that are spread so widely and why?
Well, it's convenient, isn't it? I mean, for people who want to eat fish, It's convenient to believe that they can't feel pain, that you're not causing them pain. Although, of course, if you see them flapping around, it seems pretty obvious that they are in pain. And as I said, there's careful scientific research to show that. Uh, so yeah, I think it's just sort of special pleading because people want to keep on eating fish, so they think less of their capacities for pain.
Mhm. So you've argued that buying a latte instead of donating that money to save a life is morally wrong. In your own life, how do you decide when it's okay to treat yourself to a small luxury?
Yeah, I think the way you put that was maybe a little bit too strong.
Okay.
It's not. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't have any luxuries at all. Maybe I've mellowed over the years since I first wrote on this issue. Um, uh, I think that what we should be thinking about is, in general, what can we do to help people in extreme poverty, or for that matter, to help animals as well by supporting organizations that are trying to reduce factory farming. Uh, and um, so we ought to make a substantial contribution to those causes. Uh, and if that means not having some of these luxuries, well, I think that's reasonable. But uh, I would say the way I live is I try to still be able to live a reasonably normal life. Particularly if people say, "Hey, we haven't seen each other for a long time. Let's go and have a coffee." Okay, I will do that. Um, but it's more like I'm make decisions at the end of the year about how much I can give away, and so I know that I'm doing quite a substantial amount. I think a lot more than most people do, and I feel all right about indulging with a few luxuries.
Mhm. So I've interviewed a couple of people who are large philanthropists, like John Arnold, who you may know, because he donates a lot of money. So how do you view people who, so let's say I have a billion dollars and I want to just make as much money as I can while I'm living and then give all my money away at the end versus I want to switch into philanthropy and try and do the most cutting edge throughout my life. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah. So it depends a little bit how good you are at making more money with the money that you've got, right? I mean, people sometimes say this to me that, well, imagine that Bill Gates had listened to your argument when he had just made his first million.
Mhm.
Um, and so he'd said, okay, I better give this away. I'm not going to invest in building a larger company.
Mhm.
Well, obviously the result would have been that there would have been no Gates Foundation, and I don't know what the total is now, but it's 70 billion maybe or something that he's donated.
Mhm.
Um, so yes, it was really good that Bill Gates didn't give away that first million and was able to give away much more later. But very few of us are in that position. And so I would say think carefully about how confident you can be that you will use this money better than the people that you might give it to. And after all, if there is so suppose you give directly, which is a charity that will give 90% of what you give them to an extremely poor person somewhere in Africa. And that person, let's say, that what they're doing is they're getting a cash grant, which they can use to start a small business, perhaps. So um, they get a rate of return on it too. It's not as if, yes, I can multiply my money, but when it goes to somebody in great need, they can't. Very often because they're so poor, they can multiply it at a very high rate, and they can uh, start a small business. They may employ other people, which will then give them income. They may be able to educate their children, which they couldn't do, and therefore their children will have more income when they live. So the question really is, can the rate of return that I get by holding onto my money until I die um, exceed the rate of return that somebody else can get with it? And for me, at least, I would say the answer is probably no. Um, but for some exceptional investor, maybe the answer is yes. Uh, the other thing I'd say is for most people, I think it's good to start giving early, even if you don't give very much early. It puts you in contact with the organizations that you're helping. You get feedback from them. You start to learn about which organizations you feel really confident and giving you the best possible value with what you're giving. And it becomes easier to give away more later. I am worried about the people who say, well, I'll give it away before I die, but then for some reason or other decide not to do that. Um, so I would say get in the habit of giving. But if you're a super investor, then sure, keep a substantial amount of it to multiply. If not, just give as you go.
Mhm. So this interview series has a large high school viewer I guess viewer sector, let's say.
Mhm.
So a lot of high schoolers have nonprofits that they create and they raise money, and they may spread out that money in maybe not the most efficient way. So would you recommend, I mean, this is a very specific question, obviously. Would you recommend people who want to really make an impact to raise money and then give it to another charity that can use the money much more effectively, or sort of raise it and try and do their own thing? Or do you think that's more selfish if they want to really feel the joy of seeing somebody be happy as opposed to just giving it to another nonprofit that's more effective?
Yeah, if they're living in an affluent country, the United States, Canada, Australia,
Mhm.
most of Europe, um, the return that they get for their money is just so much less than the companies that are really helping people in extreme poverty in low income countries, that I would encourage them to give to the highly effective organizations. For example, those, if people want to say, well, what are they? Go to thelifeyoucansave.org and you will find 20 something independently evaluated charities all working in low income countries that are highly effective. And if you want to see, well, what does it, what am I doing? Some of these organizations actually will you can look at video of people. For example, I just mentioned Give Directly, which hands out cash grants, and they have videos online where you can see people who have received these grants and what they've been able to do with them. Now, you're not going to get somebody saying, well, this is what I did with the $100 that you were able to raise through your nonprofit. But still, basically what kind of person you're helping and how much difference it makes to them. And I think you should feel satisfaction from knowing that.
Mhm. So many people feel a special duty to help their own neighbors or countrymen first. Why do you believe that a stranger halfway across the world matters just as much as the person living down the street, and why is that lost among so many people?
I think when you ask people, really, if you just ask them straight out, does the well-being of somebody who lives down your street, um, is that more important than the well-being of somebody who lives halfway across the world? I think most people would say no. We're all equal. All human lives are equally important. It's just as important that somebody in a different country has a good life as it is that somebody living down in my street has a good life. Um, but nevertheless, they have other ties to their local community. Maybe they feel more confident that they can see what's happening to their money. Uh, and just the people that some of them you may even know personally who you want to help. So I understand that, and I think that's okay. Obviously, I get asked by people around me sometimes for some assistance too, and I will. I don't want to be unfriendly or rude, so sometimes where I can really see that they do need it, I will give them a modest amount. But the substantial amounts that I give, I reserve for those organizations where I have clear evidence that they are going to make huge differences for relatively modest amounts. Save lives, restore sight with somebody who's blind, provide safe drinking water for a village. And if you're living in an affluent country, you can't really do that. People who have cataracts, for example, and can't see because of that can get them removed. Most countries have health services that provide that, at least for people who can't afford it. So it's just that the benefits, what you can do, are so much greater that I think that's what we should be thinking of rather than the fact that there's somebody who lives nearby or looks more like me.
You've held some controversial views for decades. Is there any significant position you held in the 1970s that you changed your mind about today?
Um, Well, there are significant positions philosophically, yes. I was a what's known as a preference utilitarian in the 1970s. That is, I thought that what we should maximize is the satisfaction of preferences. I've now seen more difficulties in that. I co-authored a book with a Polish philosopher, Katarzyna de Lazary-Radek, called The Point of View of the Universe, where I changed my mind about that in the process of writing that book and discussing it with my co-author. So I now think that we should be focused on increasing happiness, increasing welfare, reducing pain and suffering, rather than on satisfying our preferences. So philosophically, that's an important difference. It, in terms of what you were asking about, the more practical, controversial views, that probably isn't what you had in mind. Uh, I'm sort of, I suppose the most controversial view that I've held is one that I think that in a limited number of cases of parents who have a severely disabled newborn infant, they ought to be able to ask for euthanasia or assisted dying for the infant, rather than have that infant struggle to live a good life and possibly cause real problems for the family and for the existing children. Um, that's been probably the most controversial view that I've held. I still think that that's right. I think perhaps some of the things that I wrote about were not sufficiently sensitive to the concerns of people in the disability movement, and to that extent, I've changed the ways that I phrase some of these issues. But I mean, most people will agree that in these situations, if the baby needs to be on a respirator and the doctor talks to the parents and says, you know, your child has a very poor prognosis. Do you want us to put the child on a respirator or not? Or if the child is on a respirator, do you want us to turn off the respirator? Most people think that's okay, and that has the same outcome, of course. It means that if you take the child off the respirator, the child will die. So I don't draw much of a distinction between ending a child's life by turning off a respirator and ending a child's life by giving the child a drug that will mean the child falls asleep and doesn't wake up. Um, so that's why I still think that position is right. And I think if people thought more clearly about that and about the distinctions that we sometimes draw between what's sometimes called passive euthanasia and active euthanasia, they would accept the view that I hold.
So what do you think about assisted suicides more generally?
Oh, I'm very pleased that assisted suicide has become legal now in many countries and many states of the United States. I think it's clearly spreading and it will continue to spread. And that wasn't the case when I started writing about this in the 1970s. There was no country where it was actually legal at all. Um, and people worried a lot about what they call the slippery slope argument that once you start allowing some people to have assistance in dying, then doctors will start killing other people who somehow inconvenient or not wanted minorities or whatever. And that hasn't happened. So I think that's been a big force when people have looked at the countries that started doing this in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in the United States. Oregon was the first state to legalize assisted dying in the late 1990s. I think people see that, yes, this reduces unnecessary suffering when people are dying, and it provides people with a choice, with more autonomy, and it doesn't lead to a slippery slope. So, uh, yeah, why not? Why shouldn't we have it too? And I think that makes good sense.
Mhm. So let's say I have a friend who's super depressed and bipolar and claims that his life is incredibly miserable. Do you view it as a huge loss? Let's say if he goes to an assisted suicide, I don't know, clinic and decides to die.
Yeah, he won't be able to do that in the United States
Mhm.
under existing laws. He may be able to do it in Switzerland, perhaps, or perhaps in the Netherlands if he's resident. Switzerland, he wouldn't have to be a resident. In the Netherlands, I think he would. Um, I would say, has he really tried all possible treatments for the depression? Have they failed? Is his life miserable? So miserable. And in again, it's a very small minority of cases. I would say no. That may be the best thing if he's really tried everything and nothing is working and there's no prospect of something working in the near future. Then I think that's a reasonable choice for people to make. But I would certainly want to make sure that they really had tried all of the available treatments.
Mhm. So when you say maximizing preference, what do you mean as opposed to maximizing, I guess, happiness or welfare? You made that distinction.
Yes, right, yeah. So, I mean, one of the kinds of examples that led me to think that the preference view was wrong is suppose people have preferences, but when they get what they prefer, they're no happier than they were before, right? And there are cases like that. In some sense, I think some of the social media that people get so addicted to work that way, right? They get you to want things, and then when you get them, maybe very briefly you're pleased, but that rapidly fades away, and then you just want something else. And I don't think that that's a good life. You could say, yes, your preferences are being satisfied, but you're just forming more preferences. Uh, Whereas when somebody wants something and gets it, and then they really feel fulfilled, and that's important, and that lasts a long time, then I think that is a positive thing. So that's the kind of difference that I'm getting at. It's not the satisfaction of the preference that really is valuable. It's the satisfaction that leads to lasting sense of happiness or fulfillment or joy, whatever it might be, that I would see as the mark of a good life for an individual.
Mhm. So given the current political unrest across the world with many wars and protests going on and developments in AI, which could potentially be a destructive technology, are you generally optimistic about the future and do you trust in humans to do the right thing within just human nature?
I don't trust in humans to do the right thing. I think that humans have the capacity to do the right thing and will do the right thing in circumstances that are favorable to them doing the right thing. But also, in other circumstances, they can do absolutely terrible things, unbelievably bad things. I'm speaking to you from Australia. You might know that we had a, a mass shooting just before Christmas with two men who were, I think, involved with ISIS, the Islamic State, shot up a group of Jewish people celebrating the festival of Hanukkah. And it's awful to think that people are capable of doing that just in cold blood, shooting children and anybody. Um, so you can't trust that people will do the right thing, but you can try and create the conditions and circumstances in which they do. And that's really important. Now, you referred to the somewhat unstable political situation. Uh, yeah, I mean, I have concerns. I would say if you'd asked me this question maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, I would have been more optimistic about the future. I'm particularly worried about climate change because we haven't actually done enough to reduce climate change. And it's going to be a huge problem for a lot of people in the world. Uh, I'm also worried about the political instability that has arisen just in the last few years, with more conflicts. Again, we had relatively few major wars from the end of the Second World War until fairly recently, because there was, I'm not saying there weren't wars, there was the Vietnam War in particular. But now we've seemed to have more with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East, uh, and possibly other conflicts involving Iran now. So, um, yeah, I think there's some loss of stability in the international relation system, and I think that's a bad thing. I think it kept the peace quite well for a long time, and now there's much more uncertainty about that.
So climate change is something that I'm passionate about, and I'm doing sort of some activism regarding with some of my interviewees. So one of the major things I was trying to look at with I don't know, you might be Robert Litterman. I don't know if you might be familiar with him. But he used to do a lot of financial engineering stuff for Goldman Sachs. So we were trying to look at how you can incentivize people financially with the carbon bonds. It was a whole thing. How do you think we can make more influence in climate change without just trying to convince people that they should be altruistic and look to a better future?
Yeah. So we can support technologies which are going to help here. I think that's our best hope in a way. And making solar energy cheaper than fossil fuel energy is really important. But of course, governments can and should play a role, and they, can provide incentives for people to put solar panels on their roof and provide incentives for people to drive electric or at least hybrid vehicles. Um, uh, and that was a positive thing, and it's troubling that the United States administration has now moved away from that, and even has withdrawn from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that's very serious because if you have one major economy that's doing this, it's harder for the world to act cooperatively, and of course that's what you need. You need to have all of the world acting together. So. I hope that the United States will eventually come back to taking climate change seriously, and that in the meantime, other countries will not follow the example of the United States, and will continue to try to reduce climate change and to show that, in fact, it's more efficient to use solar energy and renewable energy forms rather than using fossil fuels.
Mhm. So, lastly, I ask all of the interviewees the same question, which is, how do you define success personally and professionally? Which is a large question.
Yeah, sure. Well, as I said when talking about the change in my position, for individuals, I think success is in enjoying your life, feeling that it's fulfilling and meaningful, and basically that you're having a good time being here. But I would also say that I think a mark of success is that you're able to do that not only for yourself, but for others. And so it's not only, say, your own, if you like, inwardly directed pleasures, but it's also the outwardly directed pleasure of helping others and knowing that you are making a positive difference in the world that I would see as the sign of a really successful life.
So I know I said that was the last question, except just to follow up on something you said. So how do you view, let's say, American lifestyle of trying to work hard as opposed to a more European laid back? I don't know if that's necessarily an accurate description, but
Yeah, I think it's obviously, there's plenty of Europeans who work extremely hard. I know quite a few of them, and some of them are working very hard for, voluntary non-profit organizations. Um, so I think that is a bit of a generalization. Uh, but I think having a purpose that you feel is worthwhile and worthwhile working hard to try to achieve is fine. I think if it's something that you really feel is meaningful, then that's good, and it does give you a purpose. And I think having a purpose and feeling that you're making progress with it is an important part of a good life. Um, but if you are just working hard because you want to get to the top of your organizational ladder, or you just want to earn more money so that you can build a bigger house, that seems to me to be probably a less fulfilling thing to do. It's not. It's something that is focused on yourself, and I think thinking about others and thinking about improving the state of the world is a more enduring and meaningfully rewarding thing to do than simply focusing on, what can I have? You know, can my house be more expensive than my neighbor's house, or that kind of thing? Can I drive a bigger, more luxurious car? I don't think that those kind of consumer-directed preferences, for which many people do work very hard, are really satisfying in the long run.